SO31s are 60 seconds long. I just want to remind everyone, I noticed they went over and they're good messages, so I didn't want to interrupt, but unfortunately we don't want to postpone question period because everybody's looking forward to it.
Help provide.
Honourable Member for Carleton.
Liberals announced a big new program to supposedly rescue the jobs of employees of large employers. The LEAF program, we assumed they might want to help the airline workers, 20,000 of whom have lost their jobs, the countless hotel workers who no longer have a paycheck, or God forbid, do something for the hundreds of thousands of energy workers out west who are now jobless. But none of them got help. Who got the biggest chunk of cash from that program? Consultants and insiders. The firm Lazard & Co. was the largest recipient with $3.6 million, and another $22,000 to 2 former PMO staff. Why is it only Liberal insiders that enrich themselves off these programs?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to share with the honourable member that the premise underlying his question is false. In fact, more support has gone to businesses that are keeping workers employed than has gone to help set up the programs. The contracts he's referring to simply establish the Crown Corporation to administer the program and put integrity measures in place so we know that the money is going to workers. If he doesn't think this is actually benefiting Canadians, I would ask him to talk to his members from places like Aurelia or Abbotsford or Sarnia who are still on the payroll today because of the program that's supporting them.
Well, Member for Carleton.
Well, it's actually Liberal middlemen who are getting rich off the program because, again, this program, the LEAF program, has furnished the largest sum of money to Liberal financial insiders. Now we're starting to get a sense of where all this money is going. $380 billion deficit, but only $175 billion has gone to CERB, wage subsidies, and CEBA loans for small businesses. Isn't it becoming clear that Liberals saw this pandemic as an opportunity not to save the livelihoods and lives of Canadians, but to enrich Liberal insiders with political influence?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, that question is absolutely ridiculous. I remember being on the phone through the middle of the night early in the spring, talking to workers, talking to businesses who didn't know where their next paycheck was going to come from, who didn't know whether they would be able to keep workers on the payroll. We've advanced programs like the wage subsidy that has 3 million Canadians still going to work as a result of that program. The CERB kept food on the table for 9 million Canadians, and the Canada Emergency Business Account has provided direct support to over 700,000 businesses. Mr. Speaker, we're going to continue to listen to Canadians. I'd urge that member to take part and be helpful in providing advice on the basis of what he's hearing, but if he doesn't want to, then we will go through this without him.
Honourable Member for Carleton.
We have from the very beginning supported the basic programs to save jobs and provide incomes to people for whom lockdowns have cost them their paychecks. But those programs only account for $175 billion of the $380 billion deficit, a deficit which equals $40,000 for the average family of 4. Nobody knows of a single family that has got $40,000 from this government since the March pandemic outbreak. Mr. Speaker, isn't it becoming increasingly clear that the bulk of the cash is going to Liberal cronies and insiders who stepped in between the government and Canadians?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, again, the member is putting forward falsehoods in an attempt to spin a political narrative that suits his interest rather than the interests of Canadians. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, he says now that he supports some of these programs. At the outset of this pandemic, he said the Conservatives would never support big, fat government programs to get Canadians through this pandemic. His leader, more recently, has described CERB as being completely messed up. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, it is not a leader who waits to find out whether something is popular before they decide to support it. It is an opportunist. We need more leadership to get us through this pandemic and less political opportunism.
Well, Member for Carleton.
Well, it really says something when the best attribute the member can ascribe to his program administration is that they are big and fat. We want programs that are effective in helping Canadians. They want fat for their friends, and that's exactly what they have delivered. Now, speaking of the upcoming fiscal update, the finance minister has said that her government will impose limits upon itself to avoid the brutal external restraints of international capital markets. Will the government tell us exactly what limits it will impose on the new debt it is piling on the shoulders of Canadians?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it was Oscar Wilde described a cynic as someone who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. We value on this side of the House keeping food on the table for 9 million Canadian households. We value keeping 3 million Canadian workers on the payroll. We value supporting over 700,000 Canadian businesses to help them keep the lights on. Mr. Speaker, I look forward to November 30th when the Minister will present the fall economic statement to this House to identify for Canadians how we'll continue to support them to get them through this pandemic and ensure that the recovery is inclusive and prosperous and sustainable for all.
The
Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our farmers can't count on the federal government. It promised to protect supply management, but it sacrificed them in 3 consecutive agreements. Then, it promised to fully compensate farmers for their losses. There was a check to the dairy sector in 2019, but since then, nothing. The government is presenting its economic update on Monday. Will it reveal the details of compensation for all supply managed to producers and processors? And, more importantly, this time, will it budget money for now and the years to come? The Honourable Minister of Agriculture. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I assure you that the supply managed system is something we fully understand and we defend. We defended it against Donald Trump, who wanted to dismantle it. Last summer and in 2019, we announced $175 million for our dairy producers. We paid out over a year ago a first amount of $340 million to 11,000 producers, and we will keep our promises, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Mr. Speaker, we want the details. We want a time frame. Our farmers can't rely on the federal government. That's why we need ironclad protection for supply management so it never again is used as a bargaining chip in trade agreements. The Bloc has tabled a bill to prevent any future concessions for supply management. The Union of Agriculture Producers came out today to ask all parties to vote in favour of the bill. Will the Liberal government heed the producers' call and support our bill? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, the supply management system is very important for the vitality of the regions and for our farms. We defended it against Donald Trump, who wanted to dismantle it. Less than a year ago, we paid out the first amount to 11,000 producers, over $300 million. We will continue. We will also protected supply management in negotiations with the UK.
For Mission Matsky, Fraser Canyon.
Mr. Speaker, after trading away access to Canada's dairy market, our farmers and processors are still waiting on the Liberal government to honour their commitment for trade compensation payments. We want the date, Mr. Speaker. When will the compensation be delivered to Canadian farmers and processors?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Supply management is very important for our agriculture in Canada. It's very important for our rural vitality. It's important to protect our family farms. And less than a year ago, our dairy farmers have received $345 million to 11,000 dairy farmers, less than a year ago. And we will follow our commitment, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Montmagny-Lillet, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup. Mr. Speaker, I'll give the Minister of Agriculture an opportunity to answer something very simple. When will compensation payments be paid out? Tomorrow night I've got a Zoom meeting with farmers. I'd like to be able to pass some good news on to them. I asked the Minister then to answer, when will the next compensation payments be paid out to dairy farmers? It seems to me that it's a very simple question, a very clear question, one easy to answer. The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to point out that in July of last year, we announced $17.5 billion in compensation. Less than a year ago, we paid out $345 million to 11,000 dairy producers. And I assure you that we will keep our promises, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Les Bilouvinières. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Dairy farmers are eagerly awaiting the compensation promised by the Liberal government for their loss of market share as a result of free trade agreements with our trading partners. Mr. Speaker, is the government going to take action and tell farmers how much to expect? And more importantly, will it do so before December 31st, 2020? Can the minister confirm this? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Supply management, I assure you, for dairy, poultry, etc., are very important in Canada, for Canadian agriculture, for rural vitality, to protect our family farms. And that is why we are protecting the system, and that's why we committed to protecting it, to compensating our producers and processors following the signing of certain agreements. Less than a year ago, we paid out the initial amount, and I assure you, Mr. Speaker, we will honour our commitment.
Member for Cape Breton, Kenso. The honourable member for Cape Breton, Kenso.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians have changed their ways of life to keep each other safe. I'm especially proud of my constituents in Cape Breton and Canso for all their efforts. In Nova Scotia, we've seen a surge in cases, and that's cause for great concern. We need everyone to do their part to help stop the spread of COVID-19, and downloading the COVID app is a great way to do that. Given the increases in cases, I'm very pleased that the COVID Alert app is available in my home province of Nova Scotia. Could the Minister of Health inform Canadians of the importance of the COVID Alert app and how it will keep us safe?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question and for his great work on the Standing Committee of Health. The COVID Alert app is indeed an important public health tool that will help Canadians identify if they've been exposed to COVID-19, and over 5.4 million Canadians have downloaded the app to protect themselves, their friends, and their families. The app protects users' privacy, but it also helps alert users when they've come into close contact with someone diagnosed with COVID-19. It's an extra layer of protection for users and a way to help our hard-working public health workers that are working so hard all across the country. I encourage all Canadians to download COVID Alert app today.
Draw me closer to your side. Take a page out of my story. I don't mind, no. Move, keep it steady, never falter.